Okay. So we record these meetings for our members who are unable to attend. We don't post the recordings publicly, but if anyone ever needs access to a recording, you can have them email me directly and I will get them in touch. I also want to let you know that closed captioning, the live transcript, is available. If you go to the bottom of your Zoom bar, you should find something that says CC live transcript, and you can turn that on to see the live transcript in action. If you ever need any other accommodations, please let me know. You can send me an email at my email address, which I will put in the chat. And as a reminder, the Community Mobility Committee is a place for residents and interested individuals to advocate for and learn about mobility and transportation issues in the city of St. Louis. In general, please be respectful in our conversations and questions today. We're really grateful to have the partnership of folks from the city, and we really encourage people to be respectful of the hard work that they're putting in and their efforts, as well as the efforts of other advocates and other community players in the room. We also ask that everyone avoid using any jargon or acronyms. If you are using a technical transportation term, please define it. If possible, share a link in the chat so that we can all become more familiar with the language that's used around transportation. We want this to be an inclusive space for folks from all across the St. Louis city area. I also want to remind folks to be mindful of time. We are going to be encouraging more follow-up to happen outside of CMC meetings, both through notes or through direct answers to questions. We hope this will help us be able to keep our meetings focused and respectful. And Dawn Walter is taking notes. Anything that you say in the chat will also be captured in the notes. So we'll be sure to follow up on that. I also want to encourage folks to use the chat to share questions and responses. That's a great way for us to make sure that everyone's voice is in the room, even though we've got a lot of people here and we might not be able to have everyone speak during our meeting in response to what's going on. Okay, so to get us started, I want to just make sure that we have our city partners introduce themselves and let us know who's here in the room. I'm going to start with Scott Ogilvie. If you can say hello.
Good afternoon, everybody. Scott Ogilvie, City of St. Louis Planning and Urban Design Agency, Program Manager for Complete Streets. And who else is with the city? I can't see everybody's faces. Liz, maybe you can.
Yeah, Andrew.
Hi, so I'm Andrew Lackey. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Office on the Disabled for the City of St. Louis. And I can also not see all the people that are in here. So if you could direct to the next person.
That might be it. But if the person on the phone is a city rep, can you say hello?
It's Cindy Mentz with TrailNet.
So hi, thanks. Cindy. Glad you're here. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. So I'm going to drop into the chat, and most of you received via email the agenda for today's meeting. And then I will also drop into the chat the notes from our last meeting in August. Folks had a chance to review these over the last few days. But if there are any changes or concerns, please let us know before we post those publicly today. Okay, that is our starting business. So I want to move us into our first agenda item, which is sharing concerns. So this is a time where we open up the floor to both our members and community residents to share concerns, observations, or questions for up to 2 minutes. We may not answer your question live. If it's something that someone who in the room can easily answer, then we'll address it. But most likely we will be following up with those questions afterwards, making sure that that gets to the appropriate department and that we also get the answer to the question in the notes for the future, and that gets back to you. So I want to open up the floor and see if there are any comments or questions that folks want to raise at this point in time.
Yeah, so I had a question about recently there was the CMC did a blog post on how CSB works. All right, so for those not familiar, this is basically central housing complaint distribution center, right? So anybody can call in and say a concern, and basically CSB then redirects it to the appropriate entities in the city to hopefully be addressed. I would love to have some data about CSB specifically around pedestrian and cyclist complaints. Because the basic data that you can pull from the city's website shows that it appears that the bulk of those complaints are just immediately being closed out and not being addressed. I brought this issue up in the past. I think Russell is a perfect example of this. It took me, I think something like 120 tweets on Twitter before we were able to get the bike lane parking addressed. Now there's one in the Hill that we have commercial parking blocking the sidewalk. Same exact thing. It seems like this is not a revenue or not an avenue, excuse me, for residents to actually make or bring to the attention of the city problems that we're having.
Thanks, Patrick. I think that is a really good thing to bring up. And we had explored in the past figuring out how to have a little bit more insight into how CSB works and how those tickets are filtered. So we are going to do some follow-up and hopefully that will be something we can bring to the next meeting, but we'll have some more information for you. Any other comments? Okay, surprisingly quiet today, everyone. Hearing that there aren't any other comments, I want to move us to our next agenda item, which is also a time where we will be mostly having discussion. So this may be the place where we have a variety of points of feedback. So I think as everyone in this meeting knows, we have been discussing and also experiencing a huge amount of reckless driving across the city of St. Louis. Obviously, the committee is extremely concerned about this. We know there have been 6 hit and run deaths of pedestrians or cyclists this summer alone, as well as many, many other injuries and damage to property. So we're interested in being a little bit more coordinated about how we approach addressing that. What we want to do today is open up some space for dialogue for committee members and visitors to hear a little bit about what are some of the things that you've been hearing, what are some of the high priorities to focus on, what are some of the approaches for traffic enforcement and education that people see as most beneficial. And then towards the end of this, we're going to talk a little bit about a new subcommittee that we're going to be forming that Rachel Witt has agreed to chair. So I want to open it up first for some conversation, which will help inform Rachel as she's shaping that subcommittee. And then we'll talk a little bit about where we're going next. So I'm going to put these 3 questions that we have in the chat for folks to reflect on. And I want to open it up to see if anyone has anything that they've had on their mind about reckless driving in the city. Patrick, I know you have a lot on your mind.
Yeah, I don't know really where to start on this one. So, I mean, I could probably pretty easily take up your full 15 minutes on it. You know, from our organization standpoint, we're fed up with it. This is absolutely, ridiculous on multiple levels. The city's response has been absolutely ridiculous. We have people losing their lives, and our responses are we're going to park an empty patrol car next to where they died for a month, and do some basic stuff. I think it's amazing that what Rachel and some of the other people have been getting done over on Grand. But I think it's a perfect example as well of just, it's taking, you know, a business district, a couple of aldermen, a really pissed off neighborhood association, to get a response from the city on what's going on. And that's absolutely ridiculous, right? Because that means that, you know, the bulk of the rest of the city is never going to get a response to any of this stuff, right? If this happened around one of my schools that we're working with, or in my neighborhood, we are nowhere near organized as much as these groups are right now with South Grand, right? So the responses have been, you know, they really need to be stepped up, right? The timing of them needs to be stepped up. People are really upset, you know, and there's multiple splinter groups now starting to do stuff around St. Louis, you know, pertaining to this stuff, because we're not seeing anything, you know. So like I said, I could keep going for 15 minutes, but I'll let somebody else talk.
Thanks, Patrick. Kia, you have your hand up.
Thanks, Liz. I'm going to keep it no video today, if that's okay. But I think my reaction lately has been a little bit disheartened to see that a lot of our conversation about immediate short-term fixes to reckless driving have focused on enforcement. I'm open to that conversation, but I would like to make sure that we include conversation about like pop-up traffic calming, specifically at high volume crash sites and places where there have been recent fatalities. I think it's unacceptable that we can have, you know, 2 bicycling fatalities at virtually the same location, 2 pedestrian fatalities at virtually the same location, and see no short-term changes to the street design, especially when there are manuals around tactical urbanism, which is sort of a fancy word for temporary reversible traffic calming treatments that don't cost money. We have local expertise on how to do this, and I don't understand why it isn't funded and programmatically coordinated.
Thanks, Kia. Rachel?
From my standpoint, okay, I've been running the South Grand Business District for 16 years now. When we did the Great Streets Project, there was an engineering firm who did a traffic study, and they came up with a way to synchronize those traffic signals. Todd Waltman, who was the head of streets at the time, had it implemented for a couple months and stripped it out. I just sent Bethany the plan from 13 years ago, which is now outdated, on what was proposed. We need to get engineers and the streets department to look at our roads in a different way. It's not about moving vehicles. It's about how we make it safe to bike, walk in our community. We are a city of main streets and walkability, and the problem is how our traffic signals are synchronized. They're synchronized to move vehicles, not to move people. So we had all this work done within our 6 blocks, and it lasted a few months until they took that synchronization out. So I think that's the biggest flaw that we have in the city, is how we move traffic and how we look at traffic and how we look at our main streets and our neighborhoods is a big problem we're facing in the city. I'm glad that the mayor finally said something and was in the paper stating we need to do a transportation plan for the entire city, which I agree. We need to look at our roadways differently, how our traffic signals are synchronized. But the 2 people who died on South Grand, one ran a red light, didn't want to wait, went around a car and ran the red light and struck and killed a person in the crosswalk. Then what happened with the cyclist, I was told, and correct me if I'm wrong, was the traffic was moving too slow. So they went around in the bike lane and struck and killed a cyclist. So we can do all the road diets we want, but there is a lot of crazy drivers in our city too that we do need enforcement, and something needs to change how we look at how people drive. I think there's many layers how we have to look at this. Enforcement is not the solution, it's just a variable, but we need to look at everything. In my opinion, design, enforcement, education. The fact that we don't even have driver's ed in Missouri anymore is a big problem. And maybe doing some PSAs about driving safely too, and getting people's attention on what they're doing. But we have a lot of road rage and a lot of reckless driving in this city. In the past 10 years, we've racked up over $70,000 in damages from car accidents. And the majority of them had no car insurance, no driver's license, expired temp tags. I mean, that has been the norm. I can just talk within my 6-block district that I take care of. So I just want to paint a picture of what we're experiencing in the city. And it's not just the city of St. Louis issue. This is a national problem. This is happening everywhere. But I agree, we got to look at it more than just enforcement. But the 2 people who were killed shouldn't have been killed because they didn't want to wait for a light, and they didn't want to wait because of traffic. And they went around and struck and killed people. So I'm all open to other ideas and what we can do. But also we got to look at the fact that we got a lot of people who are deviant in the city who don't care about their life or other people's lives, how they drive. So I just want to put that out there.
Thanks, Rachel. Jeff, you've got your hand up.
I do. Thank you. I was just planning on listening this whole time. This is my first meeting, but you know, I just wanted to say kind of why I'm here. You know, I'm a citizen. I live right near Arsenal and Grand, and just, you know, I've got a family, little kids, and I feel terrorized by the drivers in this city. And, you know, I feel like the community is terrorized. It's not just me. I'm not, you know, I feel like it's everybody. And, you know, the examples that I see about reckless driving, you know, it happens on a daily basis, 24/7. You know, to Rachel's point about road diets and stuff, like that's all, you know, there's value to that. But I see people going into the bike lanes on Arsenal. I see people making left turns on red from Morgan Ford onto Arsenal. I live right near Hartford and Grand. People blow through that stoplight all the time. And to like piggyback on what Rachel was talking about, how these, you know, these drivers on these 2 pedestrian incidents weren't, you know, they didn't want to wait and the traffic signals are goofed up. I get that. But you know what? Even if the traffic signals were like more synchronized, the people would still be blowing through the red lights because they don't give a shit. And you know, this is it's the behavior of just like carelessness that is, you know, is I don't know how we're going to get at it, but enforcement is, I think, a critical tool that is lacking right now. And it's part of the solution. And, you know, I don't know, it's beyond frustrating. And you know, I'm looking forward to being part of the, you know, this effort to try and change things. So I'm going to shut up now.
Thanks, Jeff. Richard?
I throw in, I walk across Forest Park Parkway and Skinker twice a day. And as you all know, those are 5 and 6 lane roads that people can really get up to speed at. Thankfully, with the university there, most drivers have an expectation that there are pedestrians there, but I've seen car debris on every corner of that intersection. And I guess I don't have great solutions other than we have to like put bollards on every corner or something to protect people and buildings from these cars, do something. You know, it's scary out there. And my heart goes out to all you folks in other parts of the city that don't have, you know, this sort of glow of the university over here that at least seems drivers are aware of. So yeah, here's my story.
Thanks, Richard. Matt?
Hi, I live in Benton Park West. I ride my bike daily and walk the neighborhood daily. I find that I do see a lot of debris of crashes. I have a really hard time getting across some of the major roads like Gravois, for instance. Those are super wide roads. You know, people talk about, you know, engineering, education, and enforcement. I think all 3 are important. You know, when I cross a road that's, you know, 100 feet wide, I think of engineering. I think that these roads, you know, they have 25-mile posted, but they're built for, you can easily drive 80 miles an hour down those. These are runways. Of course, people will drive as fast as they can, as fast as they feel safe. So I think there's a real, also crossing them, if I have to cross 100 feet with, of traffic, if, 2 lanes in each direction, if there's no pedestrian refuge in the center, it makes things a lot harder. Crossing Grand is a lot easier than crossing like Gravois, just because there is a place in the middle where you can stop. Yeah, I think it's dangerous. Like there's some streets that I would never ride my bike on, even though, there's bike lanes on, and Grand being one of those. Yeah, it is pretty scary out there. I agree.
Thanks, Matt. Sam?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say about, trying to think forward and how this committee can help be an advocate for this. And obviously one of the big things that we have to think about going forward is how we're funding these things. This is the thing that we often hear about why we don't have the things that we do and why we don't look like other cities, is because of the funding mechanisms and because of the historic population loss and the tax base, things like that. And just wondering, what can we start doing? Can we look at other cities who are using things like property taxes to get more funds to go into bike ped infrastructure? And I'm wondering, and I guess this is maybe something we could talk in more depth, Rachel, in the reckless driving, about how we can we we talked a little bit about this with the CMC meetings with some of the state representatives, is what are the different policy funding mechanisms that we can leverage, not only at the city level, the St. Louis County level as well. I mean, like someone mentioned, this is a county issue as well as much as the city issue, and a statewide issue. Is what are the things that we can start loosening the red tape to make sure that and we're not just relying on federal funding. We're not just relying on federal funding that takes 5 years or aldermanic funding, but we can start looking really proactively at things and loosening those funding mechanisms so we could see bike lanes or pedestrian refuge islands or whatever on the infrastructure side of things go in within 6 months to a year versus 3 to 5 years. And so I'd be interested to talk about more of that in depth, and about how we can, and I'm happy that I'm seeing a lot of new faces in here, and how we could use personal stories to talk with, city officials. And for me as an advocate, the magic recipe is data and personal experience, and combining that to make a story, to make a case to politicians and to elected officials. And we have that data. We have that data in troves that show that this is an issue. And we have the last 6 fatalities since July. And now I think we just need a lot more of that personal story. And so whether it's people in this committee getting together with a group and kind of putting those on paper, whether it's more partnership with Tiffany Stanfield of Fighting Hard, to start pushing some of these elected officials to, this is something that we're taking incredibly seriously, and it should be a top issue, not just citywide, but statewide as well.
Thanks, Sam. Peter?
Sorry, I was unable to join at the start. Could you remind me of the prompt here? I think you're muted.
We're talking about reckless driving and asking for folks feedback on kind of what they've seen, what they're experiencing, what they've been hearing, and what are some of the high priority areas.
Okay. Well, I am a daily bicycle commuter between the Shaw neighborhood, SLU University North Campus, and downtown. So from where I'm at, I ride a lot along Shodo between 39th Street and Grand. So from 39th Street to Grand, there's also Spring, which is right by SLU Hospital. And if you are heading east on Shodo between Spring and Grand, the bike lane ends. It is a discontinuous bike lane. It ends right there. So it kind of goes from Vandevenner to Spring, it ends at Spring, and then it picks up again at Grand. East of Grand, Shodo continues to have a bike lane. I believe the street was repaved at some point on the sort of where SLU owns the property, and I ride my bike along that every day. And a lot of bicycle fatalities happen away from intersections where the highest speed of cars are. So I'm forced to ride in the street there basically, and there's no painted line, even though we know painted lines don't do much. In my case,
it would be great to have a painted line, because drivers get aggressive when they see a bicyclist in what they perceive as a car lane and not a bike lane. So that's when, I've been subject to the most traffic violence is when I'm perceived as being in a car lane and not a bike lane. So if we could just get a painted line right there, it would benefit every cyclist heading east on Shodo between Spring and Grand.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. Ganesh and then Kaylina, and then we're going to close out some comments.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is my very first meeting. So I'm actually, I'm a researcher in the Department of Neurology at the School of Medicine at WashU. I primarily work in Alzheimer's disease, but also my work intersects with transportation, more specifically looking at driving and driving decline. But I find this to be a more personal issue to me, just because this has also impacted my life since I've been living in St. Louis for the past 11 years now. At the intersection of Sarah and Lindell, I was involved in a fairly extensive accident when I had right of way, and a driver actually took an unprotected left-hand turn right into my vehicle. Sternal fractures. I mean, it waylined me for quite a few months. Unfortunately, he didn't have a license, and the rap sheet was probably longer than most of us here. The issue was that there was no repercussions, because he actually tried fleeing the vehicle after law enforcement came on the scene, and they said, this is just what happens in this area. Coincidentally, about 5 years later, actually relocated very close to that intersection, and on Boyle, really close to Lindell, it's a widowmaker, because there is a three-way intersection, and the traffic coming from the Delmar Loop direction towards Forest Park, there's absolutely no stopping next to the stop sign. It's not even a suggestion. And so it's really requiring the neighborhood and the residents to change their collective conscience to deal with this issue of reckless driving. There's no accountability, and there are no other structural and environmental, I think, precautions to safeguard the lives of the residents living in the city. And there's a significant impact, actually an economic impact, where a lot of the neighbors are moving to the suburbs because they feel a lot safer there. And so I think it's definitely a complex problem. And actually, if you Google how to fix reckless driving, you'll get a lot of information on how to beat the rap. Or charges that you're facing. So I think this is definitely an important endeavor for us to take into consideration on what can we do at multiple different systems.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Kaylina. And then I'm going to close us out with Rachel.
Hi, everybody. I believe Peter was speaking right before Ganesh. I just wanted to echo a lot of your thoughts. I used to bike daily to work. I still bike daily, but that stretch on Shodo I was just on yesterday morning and gone, they have not striped that stretch for a year and a half now. My goodness, that's terrible. I put right at the start of this thing that I don't want to die. And I think the piece that would really help us beef up our case is the emotional side of it, because I think all of us can feel that we're changing our decisions on our personal mode of transportation based on what we're feeling in the city, the collective angst that's going on. And, when someone dies in a traffic accident, they're not just destroying that life, they're destroying the life of their family members that lost them. They're destroying the employer that previously employed them is now short a person. So I really think in our storytelling and in our demands and in our problem solving, we need to be constantly remembering the human cost, both of actual lives and in, medical injuries and emotions that take, lifetimes to undo. I can instantly recall every single car that's hit me when I've been on a bicycle and tell you exactly what went wrong, and it's never been my fault. So that I think would be where I'd like to end. Thanks.
Thanks, Kaylina, and thanks to everyone who shared your thoughts and your experiences. I want to kind of draw a thread through some of what I heard. I think I heard a lot about what we see as a culture of reckless driving in St. Louis. And what that brings to mind for me is that the way that we change our culture is that we have to change a wide range of different things, because we have to show that we care about the way that people drive and that it affects our lives. And that means changing the way that our city is built, the way that it's maintained, the way that we talk about the things that happen, the way that enforcement happens, and the way that education works, and the way that we are teaching people about how much this matters. So for me, what I've really been reflecting on, I think I'm having a lot of the same feelings as Kaylina. Like when I bike to the rec center every day to go swim laps, I am terrified that I'm going to get hit in the 10 blocks between my house and the rec center. And I spend a lot of time changing my behavior around that. But I think that what I'm particularly interested in is we as an advisory committee to the city of St. Louis, we really want to be providing feedback to our elected officials, to our city staff on ways that they can make those changes within the work they do. But there's also a broader set of cultural change in the way that we influence the communities that we work in, the way that we talk to our family and friends, the way that we drive, that we transport ourselves around the city. So thinking really broadly about that is something that we each can do, while we are also putting together this reckless driving subcommittee that's going to focus more specifically on what the CMC is doing to advocate for these changes. So I want to just very briefly, I'm going to screen share some information about this new committee and just give Rachel about 2 minutes to talk about some of those next steps and the goals we've set out for this committee for the next 6 months to get started on.
Well, a few of us have been meeting recently with some state reps to talk about state legislation and getting their thoughts and input on that, because there's a lot of things with these layers that we're talking about that needs to be addressed, has to go through state legislation for any changes. So for instance, if we decide that we want to push speed cameras, that's state legislation. Red light cameras have been deemed illegal. And if we want to add speed cameras, that's legislation. And that's just one variable for us to think about. But we just started some dialogue with a couple state reps, and I've been talking with some aldermen, and Charles Bryson has been meeting with me as well with this, along with Liz, just to get people's feedback locally on what they're feeling. Because like what Liz was saying, we're all emotional right now, and we trying to figure out what can be done and what will be done. But a lot of things I think requires policy, but also what we can do as a collective voice is advocacy and just educating people about reckless driving and safety. And also one thing we brought about bringing driver's ed back, we learned it cost $4 million and why it was cut. So what can we do? I mean, I like what Sam was saying, like, where can we find other types of funding to fund these initiatives and funding what we need to? So that's a lot what this subcommittee is going to be looking at, is researching what's out there and having dialogue with our aldermen and state reps to help push policy change that we need for legislation. So that's what we're looking at as a collective voice. And we would love anyone from this call to join. I put my emails up here already. So organized. Liz does a great job. So if you are interested,
when do you intend to try and get the first meeting of this group together?
Right now, I'll be honest with you, I am just recovering at home from COVID I got last week. So I'm just hoping to get back to the office on Friday. I would like to maybe meet later this month, at the end of the month. Maybe if those who are interested, I'll do a doodle poll to see what day and time it works for everyone. We can meet on Zoom. It's probably the easiest for everyone's schedule for us to really talk about this. So I want to
what we'll do after this meeting is I'll send a note to the full listserv with Rachel's email address. If you can email Rachel by Friday, if you are interested in participating, so you can get on her list to schedule that first session, then that will help us get started. just because you can't join next month doesn't mean you can't join this committee in the future. We would welcome your involvement.
Yeah, and as a collective voice with different ways of looking at things, I think it would be great, and different experiences for us to bring to this committee is really important. I don't want to rush anything. We want to do our homework and making sure what we're bringing to the Board of Aldermen and to our state reps is what we want as a collective voice. I don't want to do anything that's is prohibitive against this committee. I want us to be working together and not against each other. So we all need to be open to ideas and suggestions and work together and make sure we do our homework, and reach out to maybe other municipalities or other states who are doing really good things about reckless driving to bring to the table. Because let's be honest, the city of St. Louis is so short-staffed. They don't even have enough people at streets department. They don't have enough police officers right now. So we're going to have to really dig in and do a lot of research because they just don't have the manpower. I'm just going to be real with everyone. Scott, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we need to help and do our part to support the city because they just don't have the bandwidth to do it at the moment.
So thanks, Rachel, and thank you everyone for being involved in this conversation. We did not want to end this meeting only talking about what's not happening. So we have asked Scott to give us an update on some of the newly funded projects. And I think that will be exciting to see some of the things that are happening. Scott?
Yes, thank you, Liz. And thank you to everybody for sharing those concerns and experiences. I have my resident hat on here. I've had many of the same experiences that you folks have had, so I understand where people are coming from. Liz asked me, let me share my screen. Liz, you might, I clicked the wrong button. Okay. Can everybody see that? Thumbs up? Okay. So Liz asked me to touch on major new transportation projects. We are doing it this month because last month in August, the East-West Gateway Board, which is the regional board that manages how major transportation grant programs are allocated and spent, approved a whole list of new projects throughout the region. And so I'm going to touch on the projects in the city of St. Louis. This is by no means all of the projects we have, but it is the major projects that are funded via sort of the primary small number of transportation grant funding programs that we utilize on an annual basis. So on the left is all the currently programmed projects with the East-West Gateway funding. We've talked about many of these in the past. If we need to go back and maybe quickly touch on some of them later, we can, but I'm going to focus on the new projects. But on this map, there is about $190 million of currently funded projects. These are primarily what I will call city projects that we are managing, or Great Rivers Greenway projects that they are managing, but that we are generally a partner with. $87.5 million of these projects, $87.5 million of these projects include greenway or cycle track elements. I'm not saying that there are $87 million of cycle tracks, but what I'm saying is across these projects, many of them, if they are significant streetscaping projects, are including very significant bike and pedestrian enhancements. And in fact, in many of the projects, that is the driving reason to do the project. Between the city and Great Rivers Greenway, we were awarded last month almost $52 million for new projects. I'm going to touch on 5 major ones: Deer Creek Greenway, Tower Grove Connector Phase 2, Brickline Greenway on Spring, the Union Lindell Bridge replacement, and Delmar traffic signal and intersection ADA upgrades. Here's a little zoomed in map. So this is the new Brickline section in red here that was funded. That's on Spring. This yellow line is the extent of the Delmar project, much of which is underground signal interconnections, but there will be intersection improvements and signal improvements throughout that corridor. Here, this blue dot is the Lindell Union Bridge. This segment of Sarah is the Tower Grove Connector Phase 2 project. And over here, between the city and Maplewood, is the Deer Creek Greenway extension that will connect it to the River to Pear Greenway. So, yep, okay. So just to zoom in a little closer on that spring project. So north of here, really major award for Great Rivers Greenway through a RAISE grant earlier this year is funding construction, really complete roadway reconstruction, essentially on Grand from Natural Bridge south to Page. Well, Natural Bridge going a little west on Cass and then south to Page. So significant greenway and kind of linear park features in this stretch, so significant road diet. And then the next phase of that project, Great Rivers Greenway has also secured funding for, which is on Spring Avenue from Page down to Washington. That gets them very close to St. Louis University's campus. There's still a little like 2-block segment that is not yet funded, that they have a separate grant application in for a different program. But that project, so all of this Grand and Spring sort of North Brickline Greenway segment is now funded, and Great Rivers Greenway has moved into really intensive community engagement and design on that North Grand section. Tower Grove Connector Phase 2 on Sarah between Vandeventer and Forest Park Parkway. So we've probably talked at length about Tower Grove Connector Phase 1, which is Tower Grove and Vandeventer. This segment will extend that further north from Vandeventer along Sarah. Really kind of key element of this is that it will connect into another Brickline Greenway segment that is funded and that is running along the Metrolink corridor. So this goes just east of where the Cortex station is. There's a little Greenway segment there now, so it'll connect to that. But that Greenway will continue east to the Grand Metrolink station. So maybe we'll go back to the earlier map at the end, but we have a lot of projects coming together that will link together. This project, it's a city-led project. We are doing it in partnership with Greater St. Louis, who has provided a lot of the local match funding. The Deer Creek Greenway extension. So this project connects two major greenways. It connects the River to Pear Greenway and Deer Creek Greenway. I've got some screen grabs from Great Rivers Greenway's website there. They have a really cool 3D rendering fly-through that people can look at. This project is interesting because it was funded in the past in the Maplewood City Council several years ago. Kind of took a pass on it even after it was funded, but work has continued, and Great Rivers Greenway has been very diligent in their engagement with Maplewood, and the project is now back and funded and a little bit more ambitious, I think, than the previous project. So that'll connect along Canterbury in the city, down Greenwood, kind of adjacent to the rail corridor in Maplewood, then cut over on Sussex and Oxford to Big Bend to join up with the existing Deer Creek Greenway. Then a really significant project that the city is managing is the Lindell Union Bridge replacement. This is actually two bridges, which this image kind of shows. If you look here, you can see there's a bridge over Forest Park Parkway and a separate bridge over the Metrolink corridor. This bridge is over 90 years old. It's been on our list as a really key bridge that needs to be replaced for quite a while. But it's a really expensive project because it's two bridges. It's bridging two, it's an intersection bridge. It's not just a linear span. But a critical access point north-south into Forest Park, where we obviously have a lot of bike and pedestrian trail facilities, and also east-west, and also going over Metrolink. So key that this bridge gets replaced. The city right now has a web page up, which is soliciting comments. There's a survey there you can take, which has some questions about resident priorities and thoughts on the new bridge design. I think we are eager to strengthen all of the bike and pedestrian connections and amenities and access through this major intersection. So everyone is welcome to, I realize that's a long link. If you go to the city's website, search Union Lindell Bridge, that page will come up and you can make comments there. And then we have what's called a signal interconnect project along Delmar, which is going to run from Goodfellow to Vandevenner. This project is primarily about upgrading traffic signals, but this stretch of Delmar has a lot of poor ADA compliance. And so all of the intersections with traffic signals will get ADA upgrades, so they will be compliant. This project is not designed yet, so I don't have as much information on it, but it's definitely tackling an area where we know we have old equipment, but we also have very poor accessibility through this corridor. That is the new project summary. Happy to discuss any of those projects, questions about them, or other major projects that we have on the map. I will note that these projects are managed by our Board of Public Service, so there may be some questions that I don't immediately have the answer to.
Scott, one question we have in the chat is, can you give us a sense of the timeline for completion on these projects and how likely they are to be done in those estimated timeframes?
Sure. So these projects, excuse me. So federal grant projects, and so we're talking about CMAQ, which is congestion mitigation and air quality, STP, which is surface transportation program, the main federal funding, federal transportation funding programs. Projects usually take 4 to 5 years until they get built. Some of these are going to be a little faster than that, likely because a lot of design has already been done on them. So we had a separate funding award to begin some design on Lindell and Union. We're probably going to handle design of the Tower Grove Connector Phase 2 project outside of the grant, which means we can accelerate it. And Great Rivers Greenway, at least on that North Grand section, has already done a lot of design there as well. So some of them may get accelerated a little faster than that, but it is a lengthy process. So when we get a funding award, it's a long way from actually having money in the bank. So we're approved to do the project. We have to wait. We're usually allocated some funding for design 1 year. There's a very extensive design review process that has to be approved by the Missouri Department of Transportation, who has a section that kind of manages compliance on these projects. We handle design, but they handle compliance. And then you have to wait for future budget years really to get the funding to then advertise, bid the project, and award it to a contractor to construct. So it is a lengthy process, but these are fairly, well, they're all very, significant roadway projects.
Thanks, Scott. We'll take a question from Richard.
Hey, so I just read today that, estimates for highway projects in St. Charles County are coming in double what they thought. How are you guys coping or repairing or dealing with, the rise in materials and labors and costs? And are all the estimates for these projects way off now, or what are y'all thinking there?
Sure. Good question. Let me answer Patrick's question in the chat real quick. So 4 to 5 years to completion from when we're awarded the project is what I meant. So most of these projects have a construction timeline of about 12 to 18 months once construction starts. So when I say 4 to 5 years, I mean 4 to 5 years from, in some of these it's 3 to 5 from now, not from when construction or when we have funding. But to Richard's comment, yeah, that is a major parameter. The inflation of construction costs is a real factor in a lot of things we're doing. We have had projects lately that are coming in much higher than we thought they would. And that's something that used to be very uncommon. We used to run a lot of projects under budget, but costs are definitely escalating for a lot of things we do. And in some cases, there's limits in terms of contractor capacity to do some things. So I think it's something that every jurisdiction is aware of and is attempting to do it the best they can. It is also the case though that some of these projects are several years away from being bid and constructed. So things could look better by that point. It's of course very hard to predict material costs 3 or 4 years down the road.
Thanks, Scott. Cheryl, we'll take your question and then that will be our last question in this section.
All right, thank you. This is a general observation, perhaps for you, Scott, about the improvements and the projects, specifically about signalized intersections that get the crossing lights. What I've observed as a pedestrian, bicyclist, and even walking between bus stops is sometimes these improvements are implemented and then there's not necessarily a certain time, but then the walk mechanism no longer works. The lights don't function as crossings lights anymore. That is also frustrating and of course dangerous for everybody. And some of the lights don't even allow enough time to cross the 4 lanes of traffic or so specific situations. So when the city does these types of upgrades, is there a preset time where the signaling is evaluated, tweaked, or decided to deactivate that?
I don't think we would ever deactivate a pedestrian crossing. So it is one reason to do signal upgrades to make sure things are functioning. And I know that the streets department will sort of consider various signal timing parameters. If you encounter a pedestrian signal that's not working, I would definitely report that because that is something that should work. And if it was installed, it can probably be fixed generally if it is broken. I can't get too far into the details of signal timing and pedestrian crossing times just because that's sort of a detail that's within the streets department. But I would generally agree with you that a lot of default pedestrian crossing times are too short. And there are many people crossing a street who benefit from more time. And those are decisions that can be made. We can apply our judgment to, I think, deliver a little more priority timing for pedestrians in many cases.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Scott, for sharing and for everyone for raising these questions. I want to just close us out with a couple of final updates and give Dawn and Charles a chance to give an update on the engagement committee. So we talked about reckless driving already. I will send a note so everyone can get in touch with Rachel. We also have an active micromobility committee that is currently reviewing the updated permit for scooters and bicycles. Jackie Knight is the contact for that, so please be in touch with her if you want to know more about what they're doing. Traffic calming and open streets are both currently on pause as we evaluate next steps. We expect open streets will return in the spring. We'll have more information about that coming up. And then I want to hand it over to Dawn and Charles just to give a very quick update on engagement.
Yes, so I will start. We have three new members apply to the CMC. 2 were recommended by the engagement subcommittee to be general members, which we are now calling what used to be non-voting members. We've changed the name. And then 1 has been recommended to be a voting member. Liz will email everyone who can vote information about that individual after this meeting, so that can be voted on. I also want to say that I manage the CMC blog. I put up a post about the South Grand meeting that is happening about traffic calming. So if you guys hear anything, or there's a survey that is going around the city, or a meeting that you want people to attend, email the information to me and I'll review it and see if I can put it on the blog and something that can be shared very easily. And then now over to Charles.
Thanks, Dawn. So part of the conversation that has been had is around what is called Vision Zero. I will be meeting with the program manager of Vision Zero next week with the offer to have a Zoom meeting that would be shared by the engagement committee to sort of talk about what is Vision Zero, what is the what's been going on around the country and the world actually around Vision Zero, and how it might be implemented in the city of St. Louis, if not the region. So we'll be picking probably a date in November. I'll be with her next week, but probably late October, excuse me, or maybe even during part of the engagement committee meeting, which is already set up 3rd Wednesday, we can have that meeting with the person who's in charge as a program manager, and just review what some of that looks like and what it might mean for the city of St. Louis.
Great. Thank you, Charles and Dawn, for those updates. The last thing that I want to give as an announcement, I said this in email, but as folks are heading out, our next 2 CMC meetings, our next one will be October 26th. So that's on our regular timing. And then our final CMC meeting of 2022 will be on December 7th, Wednesday, 1 to 2 p.m. to avoid the holiday conflicts that our regular timing will include. I want to give a heads up that we, in the October and December meetings, we will talk a little bit more about nominations for chair, vice chair, co-chair, however it may be structured in the future. We will plan to vote on the chair and vice chair or co-chair for 2023 following the December meeting. We're hoping that we'll have a clearer description of what those roles include by the next meeting. But if that's something you're interested in, we welcome you to talk to me or to Taylor. Be in touch with us, and we're happy to tell you more about being the chair, vice chair, co-chair. So thank you, everyone, for participating today. We'll send some follow-ups shortly, and have a good week. Stay safe.